When we picture the world of diplomacy, we usually think of ambassadors, fancy residences, and high-stakes negotiations. But behind all that, there's a hidden workforce that literally makes it all run. In this explainer, we're going to pull back that curtain and look at the domestic staff who support diplomats and uncover some of the really unique and frankly serious risks they face. So let's dive right in. Who exactly are we talking about? Who are these essential but so often invisible workers? To really understand how international diplomacy works on a day-to-day level, you have to ask a pretty basic question. Who is actually running the households that allow these diplomats to go out and do their jobs? Well, the answer is a group called Private Domestic Staff, or PDS for short. We're talking about the nannies, the cooks, the housekeepers. Their work is absolutely crucial for the diplomatic families, and that means they're crucial for the whole mission to operate smoothly. So why are these workers in such high demand? Well, it's really a mix of old and new. For one, you've got cultural traditions from many parts of the world, where employing domestic staff is just the norm. But you also have very modern realities, families where both parents are working, or single-parent households, which can make live and help a real necessity, not a luxury. Okay, so that raises a big question. How are these workers legally classified? What about their protections? To figure that out, we've got to go back in time and look at the legal rulebook that governs them. And believe it or not, it was written over 60 years ago. The key document here, the big one, is the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Let's just call it the VCDR. You can think of it as the International Operating Manual for all things diplomacy. It lays out all the rules, the privileges, and the immunities for diplomats and their missions. And right here, in this document, a really critical distinction is made. The VCDR basically splits staff into two different buckets. On one side, you have members of the service staff. These folks are official government employees. But on the other side, you have what the convention calls private servants, who are hired directly by an individual diplomat. And let me tell you, that difference has massive implications for their rights. This quote just hits the nail on the head. The term private servant sounds like it's from another era. Because it is. The convention imagined this lifelong, loyal employee following a diplomat around the world. That's a world away from the reality of modern international labor. So this is where things get tricky. What happens when this 60-year-old rulebook, combined with the whole idea of diplomatic immunity, actually ends up creating brand new risks for these very workers? It's simple, really, because they're considered private employees of a person, not of a country. Private domestic staff get way fewer legal protections than their colleagues at the mission. They're kind of stuck in this legal gray area. And you can really see just how vulnerable this makes them when you look at something that most of us just take for granted: Social Security. Article 33 of the VCDR deals with this specifically, but unfortunately, it has a pretty serious flaw. Okay, here's the crucial part. The convention basically says these workers don't have to be part of the host country's social security system if they're covered somewhere else. But here's the kicker: it doesn't actually require them to be covered somewhere else. And that creates this huge, dangerous gap where a worker could end up with absolutely no pension, no unemployment, and no health coverage at all. Now, in response to these kinds of gaps, we're thankfully starting to see some changes. Host countries and new international norms are beginning to build a safety net to offer the kind of protection that the original convention just didn't. And you can see it happening right here. Host countries are stepping in and saying, hold on, and they're making their own rules. Things like mandating written contracts, setting a real minimum wage, making sure live-in staff have basic things like a private, lockable room, and even putting limits on which diplomats can hire private staff to begin with. And it's not just governments either. Best practices are starting to pop up. Hiring domestic staff is finally being treated with the seriousness it needs. Not just as some informal handshake deal, but as a real professional hiring process. That means bringing in lawyers and accountants and doing comprehensive international background checks that get repeated every few years. But even with all of this progress, we still come back to a central challenge, a fundamental dilemma that's sitting right at the heart of this whole issue. When you boil it all down, the problem is this. That 1961 agreement, the VCDR, it created the very possibility for diplomats to hire these workers, but it just failed to build in the safeguards to protect them from exploitation. It opened the door but didn't install a safety alarm. So, what you should really take away from all this is that there's this constant tug of war. On one end of the rope, you have the very real needs of diplomats to run their households so they can do their jobs. But on the other end, you have the fundamental human and labor rights of the people they employ. And that leaves us with one final and I think really important question to think about. In a system that's built on things like immunity and agreements between nations, who's ultimately responsible for protecting the most vulnerable people working inside of it? Is it the diplomat, the country that sent them, or the country that hosts them?